Welcome to This Prepared Life podcast, where homesteading and the apocalypse meet. I'm Allison, your host. Welcome to This Prepared Life. I'm Allison, your host. I've shared before about how when I started prepping, it was hard to find women preppers in the sea of prepping blogs and books out there. For every 10 or 20 male perspectives, you might find one female perspective. And I want to change that with this podcast. We relate to others who are similar to ourselves, and we can find inspiration in their stories. That is the goal for guest episodes here. To feature women from all walks of life, all ages and stages, women in different geographical locations, I want to normalize women who prep, and I hope that their stories educate, inspire, and encourage you no matter where you're at in your journey. Today, we are welcoming Chelsea. Chelsea is a homesteader and prepper who I met on Instagram. She is a mom of many and lives remotely in the mountains of British Columbia, Canada, with her husband, Dan, and 9 of their 11 children. They have been homesteading for 20 years and prepping for 10. One of their goals is to get to the point where grocery visits are limited to a few times a year. Welcome, Chelsea. It is so good to have you on the podcast.
I am so grateful that you asked me to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Why don't you start by just sharing a little bit about yourself and your family? Who is Chelsea?
That is a big question after 44 years of living. um, well, my name, like you said, is Chelsea. We live in the interior of British Columbia, Canada, in the mountains, and we have a 160-acre homestead up here. When we originally bought this homestead 6 years ago, we wanted to produce meat and vegetables for the market. And after about a year or so of doing that, we realized that what we were really wanting to do was to be more self-sufficient ourselves. And we have 11 kids. So there's a lot that's involved in that and a large quantity of food that's involved in that. So it wasn't really practical at that point to be doing both, to be selling and producing on our own.
Mm-hmm.
We do want to do that again eventually in the future once we get to the point where, like you said, we're going to the grocery store a couple times a year, which is a pretty ambitious goal. I realize it's going to take us some time. What sort of started me on the preparedness journey was there was a couple of different things, but my mom was someone who always had a garden, always canned, was really interested in healthy food. That was her motivation for um, having food stored and storing food that she had produced herself that didn't have a lot of sugar and things like that in it. And then it evolved when I had my first son to wanting to do the same thing, but also wanting to have a little bit of food security. And then as our family grew, it just became more and more practical for us to make fewer trips to the grocery store because it's very expensive. And especially if you do want to eat well or you want to eat organic or anything like that, it becomes pretty cost prohibitive to go to the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
So we just started to produce more and more of our own food. And then um, when I just started to do more research into preparedness, when I would do a search about how to say dehydrate, preparedness content would come up, and I started to do some research and investigation into that a little bit more, what that looked like. And I realized that I had actually always been a prepper. I just didn't know, I didn't call myself that, or didn't realize that there were other people like me out there that also had a drive to, because it comes from inside of me, to maybe have a little bit of more control over my life. And that's one way that I can control it is by having lots of food stored, having a sense of security. And then in 2017, we were evacuated from our property for 47 days for forest fire. And that was my first experience ever in natural disaster or any sort of event that would require some level of preparedness to be able to do it well. And we didn't actually, we weren't really prepared for that as well as I had wanted to be. So that's really put the fire under me to be
Mm-hmm.
more prepared on a broad basis, not just specifically in our property to be able to stay here if something were to happen, but to be able to take my family and be somewhere else if I needed to. And so it's kind of snowballed from there. And now I'm fully in it.
Sounds like it. I
Yeah.
have said that before that I was always a prepper. I just didn't know it.
Mhm.
And I was a homesteader before I was a prepper.
Mhm.
And that is backwards. Like most preppers are start prepping and then they start homesteading. So I relate to that. Can you share a bit about where you started in your homesteading? And you shared a little bit about 2017 and how that led to prepping.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit about where you started and what that journey
Sure.
looked like?
Sure. So like I said, my mom always canned and gardened, so I grew up doing that. So by the time I was living on my own, at 18 and had my first child and all of that, I had those skills in my wheelhouse, which I'll always be grateful to my mom for. She also raised me always reading to me historical fiction. So I had this really strong connection to old ways of doing things. I was just really attracted to it. And she'd instilled that in me. So when my husband and I bought our first house when I was 21, 22, somewhere in the, or my early 20s, um, I put in a garden right away. And I had no idea what I was doing at all. Besides, like I'd helped my mom, but I had never been part of the planning of, of how to garden or anything. And I put in a massive garden. And then I also bought 25 chicks. And this was prior to where the internet was really a resource. So I was getting books from the library. I didn't have any connection with people who had had chickens before or anything like that. And I just jumped right into it. And there were a lot of massive errors along the way. And then when my husband and I were in our late 20s, I had always known that we wanted to have acreage and we wanted to have a large, or I did anyways. I wouldn't say my husband was 100% on board. Um, so what he said was, hey, why don't we lease a farm and experience it and see if that's something that we would want to do. And so we did, and it was an off-grid cabin with hand pump water and a wood cook stove, the works, the whole thing. And I loved it, and my husband loved it less than I did. Just the truth of it. He was not as sold on the whole idea as I was. I would have bought that property right then and there, and that would have been it for me. But he took a little bit more warming up to the idea. So we ended up buying 2.5 acres. That was sort of yeah, this property that we had leased was 160 acres. So 2.5 acres, and we lived there. I got my first milk goats there, got into heritage chickens, into raising my own meat birds, all the basic kind of beginner stuff that way.
Hmm.
But I just outgrew it really quickly. And my husband, being an absolute gem, was like, all right, okay, your heart is obviously really in this, and he's always been a supporter of my dreams, and
Mm.
so we ended up moving here to this large acreage, and I have to say that since 2017, with the evacuation and all of that that happened during that time. My husband actually stayed here with our oldest son and protected the property during that period of time. So I had the kids off the property. So he was left with what was here, with what food we had stored. And it gave him a real appreciation for the effort that had been put in
Mm.
to make sure that there was food here, because they weren't allowed to leave the property or anything like that,
Mm.
because it was an evacuation order. He started to really appreciate it. And then with world events over the last couple of years, that he's 100% on board now. So that's a very long-winded response. This is such a topic
No, it
I'm
was
really
great.
excited about. So
Can you tell me a little bit more about just that evacuation in 2017? Share with us about that experience. Maybe what did you learn and what were you evacuated for?
sure. So it was forest fire. It was
Okay.
during the BC 2017 forest fires where we had fire completely surrounding our ranch, and it wasn't just that it was surrounding our ranch. My sister lived an hour away from us. It was surrounded her property. My mom lived an hour away from there. It surrounded her property. It was basically this entire region of British Columbia was on fire. And so when the fires first broke out, my family came here because we all thought there's no way, because we're across the river from where they were. We just thought, well, we'll just be here. There's no way the fires are going to come here. And within about 48 hours, they did. And it was the strangest, most surreal experience. If it happened again, we are way, way more prepared, which I can talk about that. But then we had our trailer, we had a big van. We basically loaded everything from our house. It was ridiculous. Into our van, completely impractical things like my canning and my just it just was more of a shock than I thought, because I had read it. We knew we lived in a forest fire zone. I thought we had a pretty good plan in place, but we absolutely didn't. It was pretty chaotic.
Mhm.
And we left with my husband. We didn't understand how evacuation orders worked at that time. So my husband came with us. We set up, we went to a hotel the first 2 nights, and then we set up at a campground because we have a travel trailer for just this sort of circumstance, so that we would be able to, with such a large family, it's pretty impractical to stay in an Airbnb or a hotel or anything like that. So we set up at a campground, and I stayed there with the kids with my big sacks of beans in my trailer. And oh my goodness, it was ridiculous. But, and then my husband came back home, and he was able to get a pass to come back in with my eldest son, who was an adult. And they stayed here. They built a fire suppression tank, a big, huge tank with fire pumps and everything. And they did patrols with the neighbors. We live in a ranching area, so all of the people
Mhm.
around us had been through this before. And so they kind of set up patrols to check fire lines, have set sprinklers up, make sure our hay was cut, all of these different things. But it was 47 days of what I consider now in hindsight unnecessary stress, because had we had some sort of plan to a place that we could have gone, for instance, maybe a small piece of property somewhere, or even a campground that we had pre-planned that would fit our needs well, or something like that, it would have been
Mhm.
so much better. And also food that was easy to transport rather than, you know, 500 jars of canned vegetables. It was completely impractical. Um, so yeah, so we're in a very different circumstance now, but that was a major, major wake up call for me,
It
and
sounds
removed
like
any
it.
sort of arrogance I had about my own preparedness.
What is something that you would share with someone else? Like, take me. I live in a zone, an area of North Idaho that gets frequent fires. The current valley we live in has not had one in a very long time. So everyone says it's due. What
Hmm.
is something you would share with someone who hasn't had to do that and needs to make some plans?
Well, what we have done is we do have the ability to fight fire here on our property now, where we didn't before. So that would be a big one, because something to understand about most farm type properties is that we're not covered by forest fire or not forest fire management, but there's not a fire truck that's going to be coming to our property. So the only way that it's
Hmm.
really going to be protected is by ourselves. So I would say making sure that you have some means to defend your own property against fire, understand the laws around you around evacuations, and whether or not you can legally stay where you are. In most places, at least in BC, you can. The other thing would be to have some sort of means to like a travel trailer, even a tent, some camping gear that you could have to be able to go somewhere else, because most natural disasters are limited in scope, so it's not something that's going to be necessarily going on for an extended period of time. So most people could camp for a couple months if they needed to, with the right
Hmm.
equipment. So having that prepared, and then having some form of either extra money put aside if you need to be gone from your property. So if you needed to stay in a hotel, or you needed to rent a campsite, like which was in our case, or something like that, make sure that you have money set aside for that. And then the more practical things, which are having food stored. So a 72-hour bug out bag is always a really good idea, of course. A little bit longer than that, I would say I would go up to 2 weeks for if you live in an area in which you know natural disasters could happen. I would bump it out to 2 weeks to make sure that you have that much food for every member of your family. And yeah, so those are all the things that we've implemented.
Those are great. So, one of the most frequently asked questions that I get, and I'm not sure if it's one of your most frequently asked questions,
Hmm.
but it's food storage. Would you
Hmm.
share a little bit about what your food storage looks like for your family, how you organize and rotate? Just kind of what is your system?
Well, I have to say I'm one of those people that doesn't really have a great system in place. So, and I actually think that can be kind of a relief to some people, because if you go online and you search this kind of stuff, it can be so overwhelming seeing spreadsheets people have and all of these lists and how many pounds of rice you need and sugar you need and all this kind of stuff. It can be super overwhelming. So in our case, I just started. I read a post you actually put up, I think it was yesterday, about little by little. It's not that, and that's not that somebody could come to my Instagram channel or my YouTube or anything like that, and they could see everything we have now, which is a solid 6 month supply on most things, a year on lots. I have a root cellar, a cold room, 4 deep freezers, and all of this stuff. But this took, like you mentioned at the beginning, 20 years for me to get here
Mm-hmm.
to this point. So I can tell you what we have, but I don't want anybody to be overwhelmed by that because it took a long, long, long time to get here. Um, so I have a root cellar. We store 100% of all of our root vegetables. So potatoes, turnips, um, what did I just harvest yesterday? Parsnips, those kinds of things. Anything that can be stored in a root cellar. I have a our everything we would need. We don't buy things like that anymore, potatoes or anything like that. I have a big pantry that I store all my canned goods in, and I'm an avid canner. So I this year I'm just about to 1,000 jars of canned product. And when I say I am, what I'm actually saying is our family is, because we all participate in what we do here. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
I might have personally put the products in the jars and stored all those jars, but my whole family participated in the growing and the harvesting and the chopping and all of that. And we have a large family, so it doesn't take us very long to be able to prep, you know, 500 pounds of tomatoes or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
We also raise 100% of our own meat. So we raise chickens, turkeys, pigs, cows, all of that, and we do all of that processing ourselves. And what else do we do? I don't know. Oh, we have a milk cow. So we have a couple of milk cows, so we're producing the majority of our own dairy at this point as well. So how I figure out how it is or what it is that we need is mostly just by trial and error, honestly. I started
Mm-hmm.
buying large bags of beans, and I just paid attention to how long a 25-pound bag of beans would last us. And so it was more through experience, not through so much researching or putting numbers into a calculator, a food calculator, or anything like that. And one of the most important things, though, that I think I did that made all of this easier is I learned how to cook food from scratch. And I learned how to
Yes.
cook with things like beans and potatoes and rice and things like that, because it just made it so much more financially doable, and just less stressful, because I can put up a couple 100 pounds of beans in my pantry, which can last a good long while, and I know how to make a lot of different food meals with that stuff. So I hope that answers the question.
That was great. I absolutely loved what you just said about, learning how to cook. And I don't know if you've heard me go on one of my tirades and talking about lost skills. And
Oh, it's
I think
huge.
that
Oh, but
it's huge.
don't you think it's so exciting, though, watching this movement towards these things, because
mm,
it isn't just the
yes.
crowd anymore that's doing it. I get contacted from people, young people in their teens, people that are up in their 70s, that are learning how to do these things, and I think it's so exciting and it's really empowering. Once you start learning how to do these things on your own, it's very addicting because it's very empowering.
Yes, I totally agree. It is 150%. amazing. I feel like
Mhm.
there's this awakening happening
Me
in a lot
too.
of people. And I just absolutely love answering people's questions. And then when
Mhm.
they come back and update me, and
Oh,
they're like, I just
the
canned my
best.
first batch of applesauce. And it's like, I just want to hug you. I am
Me
so
too. I
excited
know.
that you did that. You made applesauce. That's great.
What I
Like,
get a
I
lot of
love it.
pictures of. Yeah, me too. And what I get a lot of pictures of, because I share a lot of gardening content during the summertime. And so there's been one woman in particular I'm thinking of, who contacted me a few years ago and just had started asking questions via the comment section of videos and things like that. And now she's been sending me this past summer pictures of her garden. She didn't have a
Oh, that's
garden or
great.
any experience when we first started talking, and she killed it this year. She did absolutely, and she was canning stuff she was producing out of her garden, and it was just so inspiring, and it makes it feel very worthwhile to share this kind of information, because
Hmm.
you get to see things like that. It's an honor.
Yes, it definitely is an honor. I have been talking a lot recently, just about prepping as a lifestyle.
Hmm.
And I wanted to get your opinion. In my opinion, it's a lifestyle. It's not a do it and forget it. You don't fill your bucket with beans and leave it in your basement for 30 years.
Hmm.
How does preparedness play into how you live your life?
I would my eldest son, who's just about 25, and I were talking a couple of days ago, and he just said, "Mom, this has just always been who you are. This is a lifestyle. It's something you love in the same way other people love other things. Like someone might love painting, somebody might love mechanics or something like that. And you've just always really loved this. It's a part of who you are." So I would say that for some people it's a lifestyle. This is just my opinion on that, is that
Hmm.
for some people it's a lifestyle. But I would say that for the majority of people, I personally think it's imperative. I think that preparedness is something that can produce such a level of mental security. And especially in the times we're living in right now, I feel like no matter whether you make this your lifestyle or not, it's it's a practical thing to be doing. And whether or not you have maybe possible job loss, illness, all of these other reasons why being prepared could ease your suffering in the future. So I think that there's people that make it lifestyle like you and I, who really love what we're doing. And then I think there's other people that might live in an apartment in a city or something like that. And they can start making it their lifestyle as far as paying attention when they go grocery shopping to the things they're buying, and buying a little bit of
Hmm.
extra each time, especially things that are non-perishable, and stocking those up so that they can have a little bit of mental security about knowing that they have some of that food there for at least a couple of weeks if they maybe couldn't go to work for a few weeks or something like that. And then for those that grab a hold of it and go, wow, this feels really good, that's when I think it becomes more of a lifestyle thing. But I think it could be like overwhelming for somebody if they felt like they had to make this their lifestyle, because it's a big thing. I don't know if it's like this for you, but it first thing in my mind in the morning, most of the things that I do throughout the day are connected to it in some kind of way, and I have the privilege of being able to be home doing this full time. So it's
Hmm.
just part of what I do. When I go to bed at night, I kind of take inventory of what I did that day. What do I need to do the next day that has to do with harvesting the food or whatever it is. And I just don't think it's like that for everybody. So
Hmm.
that's what I would
Yeah,
say.
I think like, there's prepping and there's homesteading and then there's homestead
Yeah,
prepping.
exactly. We're like the
It's
extreme
like
version, the extreme version of both pro prepping and homesteading.
does that mean are we the really crazy ones or
I
not?
don't
I'm
know.
not
Sometimes
sure.
I wonder that. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree that there is a difference between the two.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to hear more. And I know it's, a question a lot of people will sometimes ask is how to involve your kids. And I know for me,
Mm.
we have gardens, we have animals. That's just kind of what we do. Everyone lives here, so everyone does chores here. Do you have
Mhm.
any specific ways that you have prepared children to deal with emergencies and prepping and
Yeah, no, it does, and I'm just really thinking about that one because that's something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about because I think I can be kind of single-minded about things and really passionate about this topic and very I love following what's happening in the world. Well, I don't love it right now because it can be pretty depressing, but it's something that I do a lot of, and so the what I talk about a lot of the time and the way that I live my life is around that. And that's not always, at least in my experience, been the best thing for my kids to have kind of like a doom and gloom type
Mm-hmm.
view of the world. You know what I mean? And so I have been careful about they understand. I mean they obviously know we're pretty prepared and they understand why because when we were evacuated, my kids bring it up all the time because it was a huge event in their lives. And now with everything that's happening with the pandemic and all of that, my kids are living through a really unique time in history. So they're aware of what's happening and they're aware of why we're doing what we're doing. But I try to find balance between that and that our whole life kind of revolves around this homesteading thing. And there's a lot of work, excuse me, that's involved in this kind of lifestyle. And um, what I would call sort of normal 21st century childhood because we don't live 100 years ago. And I have tried in the past to almost live like that. And my older kids, because I have three adult children now, um, have have given me some feedback on that and said, you know, in this area, if there'd been a little bit more balance in this area, or we'd had a little bit more access to, you know, pop music, pop television, whatever it happens to be,
Mm-hmm.
these things, um, it would have had a little bit more balance. So I actually make a lot of effort to try to have a balance with that. My kids all are very, very skilled. They can all, we're actually butchering all of our chickens in the next couple of days and all of my kids participate in that. They all participate in daily farm chores. They all participate in canning. Most of my kids who are 12 and older can can food and know how to do it they know how to dehydrate. They know how to store food in root cellars, all of these kind of really cool old skills, but they're not necessarily, they're cool to me, but they're not necessarily cool to them or their
Mm-hmm.
friends. So I really try hard to balance. Like we have an Xbox in the house, and the kids will negotiate extra chores to play extra time on, you know, the Xbox and things like that. And yeah, I think there's a balance in there somewhere that I'm hoping I'm finding now that I haven't been so great on in the past.
Mm-hmm. I love that your adult children were able to share that with you. I
Hmm.
think that it's just valuable to, and most people don't, get that opportunity to hear a perspective, but still have young enough children to implement some changes.
I know. I've been thinking a lot about that actually because my oldest is 25 and my youngest is 6. So
Wow.
I do feel like I've joked about this with my husband in the last couple of weeks that it's like we're getting a second chance to do what to do. Not that we did a bad job the first time around, but you know, to make some improvements. So we
And
are.
and that 6-year-old then as an adult will be like, "Mom, I wish you would have done it the other way."
Yeah, exactly. That's right. That's right. Totally. So there is a balance in it. But they are, I mean, my kids are super skilled in a lot of ways and are aware of the state of things. And I kind of hope that what I give them is actually hope for the future, not the opposite. Like I've tried
Mhm.
to be very selective about the level of things that I share with them or talk to them. I'll talk to friends about that or my husband or whatever about the newest thing that's happening in the world or whatever and try to instill in them more that this is empowering for their future. Like dad and I are working really hard to
Mhm.
create a place or a space that they'll be able to have or will be producing food on this property for the family, whether we have kids living here or not, things like that, and turn it into a positive instead of that it's based on fear or impending doom or anything like that, which I think can happen
Mhm.
in the prepper movement.
Yeah, I always, um, try and speak to that. There's a hashtag prepared, not scared. Um,
Yeah.
what would you, as someone who has been doing this for a very long time,
Hmm.
say to a brand new prepper that is just starting out?
Oh, that's such a hard question. When I get that question specifically from a person, I try to ask their situation because it's such a hard
Okay.
question to answer as a as a blanket, like this would apply to everybody kind of thing. I would say not to get overwhelmed. Follow people like you who are sharing that kind of message. Like, don't get overwhelmed. Start small. Start where you are. Grow where you're planted. Don't look. You know, you can look at people like us who have been doing this for a long time to get inspiration and to learn for sure. But don't compare yourself to that at the beginning, and also to just start small, even if it's on the homesteading side of things. Don't be like me and go buy 25 chickens, you know, to start. Buy five. Learn how to do it so that you can be successful, so that you can avoid some of the failures that people like me have made. And
Mm-hmm.
and pay really close attention to what it is that you, because food is a big thing, like you were just mentioning. It's probably the number one question is how do we deal with food? How do we put up food? What do we even put up? And I would say if you don't eat beans, don't store beans. If you want to learn how to use beans, then buy them as part of your weekly staples and start integrating them into your diet, and then go buy the 25-pound bag of beans, because otherwise, like you said, it's going to sit in your the back of your closet for 25 years, and that's not doing anybody any good, and it's a waste of money, really. So start small and and honestly learn how to cook. Like I kind of feel like that is one of the biggest things. Learn how to cook from scratch. Maybe something that you buy weekly that's in a box. Try to learn how to make that thing but from scratch, because it's so much cheaper. And with inflation right now, it's a good idea to learn how to cook from scratch because it's less expensive. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, oh, it's such a big question, Allison. I don't know how to answer that one succinctly. I'm
You
sorry.
answered it great. You answered it great. That was amazing. You talked about failures, and I am just a big believer that, and I actually, I have wanted to talk a little bit about that later. I have another question that's kind of similar.
Mhm.
But we learn from our failures. Like,
Mm,
yeah, I love failure. I don't,
me
but I
too.
do
I
all
mean,
at
I
the same
don't,
time.
but I yeah, exactly. I don't really,
But
but I really do. Yeah, the best
what
teacher, right?
are some of the mistakes that you made that were just the greatest learning experiences for you?
Oh man, the biggest. I mean, and this kind of goes back to my personality, is that I tend to take off or bite off more than I can chew. I don't do that so much now, but I certainly spent the majority of my 20s and 30s doing that. And it, what I've learned now is if a certain thing that I'm going to do causes a level of anxiety in me, so different than like healthy stress, but anxiety in me, I just don't do it, or I really think about it, or I really try to do it in a way that doesn't give me that feeling. So when like I mentioned, when I first started the 25 chickens or the huge garden, I would say my biggest failures have been connected to trying to do the big thing before I've even learned how to do the small part of it. Learning, and I did learn this. So when I started to get into dairy animals, this is a piece of advice I often give people: is I went and spent time on a farm with people that raise dairy cows for or dairy goats, just about a year before I actually brought dairy animals onto my own property. And but it was learning from doing all of these catastrophic things where I couldn't take the proper care of the animals because I didn't have the proper infrastructure in place, or I just didn't know how, or anything like that, and caused harm to myself and maybe even potentially to the animals because I didn't know what I was doing. Doing it like that,
Mhm.
where I would just do it more slowly and more thoughtfully and not impulsively. I can be impulsive, and I think those failures around impulsivity, around biting off more than I can chew, have been the biggest teachers to me. And I'm hoping will make the last half of my life a little less stressful than the first half, just to be perfectly honest.
I think we are so similar because
I
I
kind of
struggle
think
with
so
all
too.
the same things.
I thought that too when I first came across your content and I was looking through it. I thought, oh, I really resonate with this woman.
Yeah. Joe and I have a rule, and it's a rule that we have implemented because we learned it from very hard experiences that we do not buy an animal unless their house is already built.
Amen to that, sister. Exactly. That is exactly. My husband has insisted, let's just put it that way. He's been like, I can never come home to an animal in the barn to you being like, oh, by the way, tomorrow we need to build, you know, infrastructure for this animal. Yeah, that doesn't happen here anymore.
Yeah, we have been pretty good about that rule after some
That's
pretty
awesome.
awful experiences and learning experiences.
Right. I hope people that are listening to us can really take that one piece really to heart because it could save someone a lot of grief.
Yeah, yeah. So you shared, some of your mistakes. What is one thing or multiple, you choose, that you have done over the years that you just are really proud of?
Gardening, I would say. I would say it's something that really love um, doing. And so it's like I was saying before, it's like somebody else who likes painting or somebody else who likes, who has a passion for something. I have a passion for gardening, and I'm really proud of everything that I've learned and the level that I'm at now compared to my first garden, which was a catastrophe. Um, I feel like I'm at the point now where I would say 99% of all of my plants from seed myself. I have a grow room in my house where I start things, and then my husband and I built a small greenhouse outside that we converted into a plant nursery. And and I can produce food. My garden might not be the most beautiful, and it might not be the most weed free. In fact, that's a guarantee. It is the weediest garden I think I've ever seen on YouTube, but it produces a lot of food for this family. And I'm really proud of that when I go down into my root cellar and I can see all the food that this family has produced this past summer. It is it is just an amazing feeling. So I would say of all of the prepper related types of things, that would be the thing that I feel um, really good about and something I really like to share with people. It's
I
inspiring.
like that. And I love seeing your garden in your Instagram stories
Hmm.
because it is very real.
Yeah, I try to. Oh boy, that's hard. That real thing online, it's not an easy thing, but I think it's important.
Well, is there anything else that you would like to share with us today? I mean, you send me answers to the questions I ask, and I can, form some question
Hmm.
topics that I think might be good, but you know you better than anyone. Is there
Hmm.
anything else you want to share with us today?
I would say that if there was ever a time to look at preparedness, now is probably it. So I just was talking about not fear mongering it with my family and all of that kind of stuff, and I think that there is sometimes a, a, a time and a place for serious talk. And I do think
Mhm,
that we are in a time right now. I think most of us would say that we've been there for a while and that things are difficult. But I think that as far as supply chain shortages, inflation, I think they could have a pretty big impact on people, even if it's just over the short term, even if it's 6 months that we're going to be dealing with that. I think that in order to, if I could help to alleviate someone else's suffering, by saying that now is a really great time to start learning some skills and particularly start putting up some food. I mean, farmers markets are kind of coming to an end right now, but squash is cheap and squash stores really well. You can buy a squash for $1 or $2 and can feed you
mhm.
for quite some time, a good sized squash. Things like that. Just start doing some research, start connecting people with people like Allison, myself, lots of other amazing women out there who are doing this, and just start now. Now is a really good time if you haven't started already to get some food stored. So that would be what I would say would be kind of the most important thing.
Definitely getting started, I think, is something a lot of people are feeling right now.
Hmm.
You shared in your Instagram stories recently, I think it was maybe 2 days ago. And listeners, the we are recording this podcast episode. It's beginning of October. So just so
Hmm.
you know, if you hear stuff that we're talking about that maybe doesn't quite fit into whatever time this airs. But you shared recently that as your season of life changes, you're finding more time to devote to your social media stuff and your web presence and your YouTube. And that is something I really resonated with as I was listening to your stories, because my kids are older. My youngest is 13. My oldest is 21 or
Mm-hmm.
20. She's almost 21.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm finding I just have more brain power and time to devote to this passion that I have had for so long. And can you share a bit about one, where people can find you
Mm-hmm.
online? I know you have a couple different things going on, and
Mm-hmm.
what your passion is for these spaces.
Sure, I would love to talk about that. I'm on YouTube under Little Mountain Ranch and on over on Instagram as well. YouTube, I would say, would be my main where I work the most. Instagram is something that I touch in with daily, and I share snippets of my life throughout the day. Um, but when I started, it started as I started when my youngest was a baby, and I did it as a way to have a creative outlet for myself and a community of like-minded people because I had been watching YouTube, the homestead kind of YouTube channels for about a year before I started myself, and it really attracted me to be part of a community like that and it has turned out to be that. It's been amazing, and I knew that over time as my youngest got older, that because I've been through it a few times, I knew once she hit around 5 that things would really shift as far as the type of need that she had for me. On the every 5 minute type of thing like little ones need,
Mm-hmm.
and I sort of planned that I would shift gears into more creating more of a job for myself that way, and that's what I've done. And it's been such a blessing to be able to be at home because I'm home with my family, and to be able to do this. Number one, to have the connections with all of these amazing human beings out there. It gives me a lot of hope for the future and for humanity because there's so many wonderful humans out there. I'm sure you've experienced that too. It's just like, wow, there's and so many powerful and amazing women who are out about inspiring each other and lifting each other up, which I just love. And then also being able to share this kind of information during this really unique time that we're living in, where I feel like people can come. I try really hard on my content to keep positive. I don't talk about politics or I don't talk about world events and things like that. That's just not what my content is about. It's more about
Mm-hmm.
inspiring people to grow food and all of that. That's why it's fun for me to talk to you like this because this is not a side of myself that I get to engage with in this way. So you can probably hear the enthusiasm in my voice
I
just to talk to
can.
somebody else like this because it's 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 just not something that I really talk about a lot, even though that's what I'm teaching. It's not. Does that make sense? It's not just like a direct like
It
this is
totally does.
yeah. So it's really exciting for me to be able to shift things. And my husband is currently in the position of being able to be home a lot more, which has allowed for us to split duties a little bit. Like I said, he's out with my kids right now, so that I can sit here and do this with you, and that frees me up to share more of this content. And I feel very lucky to be able to do it, and also that I hope it's helpful. I hope it can offer something to this community that has some value.
Yeah, I can hear the passion in your voice when you talk
Yeah.
about the community and inspiring and lifting up one another. And I just absolutely love that. Um, Tell us what your YouTube is and your Instagram, just one more time in case anyone missed it.
Okay, Little Mountain Ranch is the name of my YouTube channel, and my handle on Instagram is the same. And yeah, and I share all kinds of stuff. I'm just sort of fine tuning what's happening on my YouTube channel as far as what content it is most valuable to my audience. But I do share a lot about gardening over the summer season, food preparation. We're just installing a wood cook stove in our house right now as we speak. Actually, my husband's been installing the chimney all day today. And so we're going to be doing some content around that, around learning, how to use a cook stove. I've had a cook stove several times in the past, and so I'm so excited to bring that to people because there's so much nostalgia connected to it, but there's also a lot of skill that's connected to it that'll be fun to share.
I have enjoyed seeing the pictures of it go in, and it's just beautiful. So
It's so beautiful. I'm so happy.
thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I just really enjoyed hearing your journey and your story and your heart for preparedness.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a ton of fun. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. I'm so glad you joined me. So, as always, you can find me on Instagram at This Prepared Life if you have any questions. And if you have questions for Chelsea, you can find her on YouTube and Instagram at Little Mountain Ranch. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for listening today. And until next time, remember, every little thing matters, and a goal without a plan is just a wish. If you have questions, you can find me on Instagram at This Prepared Life. I'd love to connect with you over there. You can also find me on the internet at www.thispreparedlife.com. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, I would love it if you would leave me a review on Apple Podcasts.